Not all debt is bad. The wealthy use debt to build wealth, and the poor use debt to buy liabilities. And now here's the difference and why it matters. I'm an ex-banker who's structured over $500 million in financing. And one of the biggest mistakes I see high income earners make is treating all debt the same. They aggressively pay off their investment loans while keeping non-deductible debt, or what they do is they smash their home loan thinking that they're getting ahead when really they should be using that capital completely different. I'm going to break down exactly what good debt is and what bad debt is, because I know we hear these terms thrown around all the time, and I'll show you real examples of each of these and explain why understanding this is the key to building wealth instead of just earning a high income. Now, let's get into it. The core rule is that good debt buys assets and bad debt buys liabilities. Now, the difference sounds really simple, but most people still get it completely wrong. Now, good debt is used to buy assets that either appreciate in value, generate in income, or do both. So investment properties, businesses, equipment that produces revenue. The asset pays for the debt and puts money back into your pocket. So that's what we consider an asset. Whereas bad debt is used to buy liabilities. So things that lose value the moment you buy them and cost you money every month. Cars, boats, consumer goods. So you're paying interest on things that are worth less every month and draining your cash flow. So that's a liability. And believe it or not, your house that you live in is considered a liability because there's always outgoings for your house. You're always paying for things for your house. You're paying for the mortgage, which you do for investments. But the only difference is you're not receiving an income for what you're paying for. You're paying for the mortgage. You're paying for council rates. You're paying for everything. So I'm not against having your own home, but I would like people to ensure that they also have other assets in place and don't think that their actual home itself is an asset, but we can get more into that later. Here's what I see all the time. Most high income earners actually have this backwards. Okay, they're really comfortable taking on a $100,000 car loan because they can afford the monthly repayments, but then they're hesitant to borrow $600,000 for an investment property that generates rental income and appreciates in value. So they're using debt to buy liabilities, and then they're effectively avoiding any debt that builds wealth. They've got it in reverse. Now, here's the thing. The wealthy actually think the opposite. They use as much good debt as possible to acquire assets, okay, and then they avoid bad debt completely where they can. Okay, and that's the fundamental difference between earning a high income and building actual wealth. It's one thing to earn all your income and then spend it in the wrong places versus earn a high amount of income and then spend it in the right thing so that in the long term, it's going to pay off for you. Now, here's another lens to look at this through. Good debt is usually tax deductible, whereas bad debt never is. Because when you borrow money to buy an investment property, the interest on that loan is tax deductible. So if you're paying $30,000 a year in interest, okay, the ATO gives you back $10,000 to $13,000 depending on your tax bracket. So the government is subsidizing and effectively your wealth building. So it's a win-win situation. And the higher your income, the more valuable that deduction becomes because obviously it's going to reduce the more tax you pay. Now, when you borrow money to buy a car or finance consumption, that interest is not deductible. Now, you're paying with that interest with after-tax dollars and getting nothing back. Exact same thing for your home loan. So if you're in the 45% tax bracket, you're earning almost double what you're spending just to cover the interest because you've already paid tax on it. Like I said, it's the exact same thing. Your home loan falls into this category too. If you're living in the property, the interest is not tax deductible. And from a tax perspective, it's bad debt. Even though most people think of their home as their biggest asset, it actually is a liability until it starts generating you an income. So if you decide to rent out your house and it's generating you an income, then it's no longer a liability. But for as long as that you're living in it, it is. Okay, and this is where it gets really powerful. So if you borrow against your home to buy an investment, that new debt becomes tax deductible because it's being used for investment purposes. So you've just converted your non-deductible debt into deductible debt without increasing your total borrowing. It's called debt recycling. And if you're not sure what debt recycling is, go back and watch my video on debt recycling after you watch this, because it will break down to you exactly how you can convert your non-tax deductible home loan debt into tax deductible home loan debt. Now, here's the thing. High income earners who understand this, they structure their entire financial position around maximizing tax deductible debt and minimizing non-deductible debt. It's actually what I do too. So they're not trying to be debt free. They're trying to make every dollar, okay, of interest work in their favor. So instead of really being fixated on not having any debt, what I say and what I do myself and my highest income earning clients do is that they want to make sure that all the debt they're taking out is doing work for them. They're not afraid of taking out debt as long as it's the right debt. Okay, now let's look at assets that appreciate versus liabilities that depreciate. So good debt finances assets that goes up in value. These assets increase in value. Whereas bad debt pays for liabilities that reduce in value. So let's say you borrow $600,000 to buy an investment property. Over 10 years, that property appreciates to around $900,000, if not more, because historically, property has doubled in value over 10 to 15 years in Australia. So you borrowed $600,000 and now you own an asset worth $900,000 conservatively, plus you've had a decent amount of rental income from that property. That debt has helped you build $300,000 in equity you wouldn't have otherwise had. Now, let's say you borrow $80,000 to buy a new car. Over 10 years, that car is worth maybe $20,000 and you borrowed $80,000 to buy a liability that's now worth $20,000. And guess what? When you buy a car, as soon as you drive out of the car dealership, a lot of you probably know this, that car depreciates in value. This is what wealth creation versus wealth destruction is, because high income earners can afford both repayments. I get that. They often don't think critically about what debt actually makes sense, because the car loan feels fine because the repayments fit the budget, but the investment property feels a little bit risky because the loan amount is bigger. Now, the wealthy ignore the absolute size of the debt. They look at what the debt is acquiring. A $600,000 loan for an appreciating asset that generates income is infinitely better than an $80,000 loan for a depreciating liability. Okay, effectively, the number on the screen is irrelevant. What matters is whether the debt is building wealth or destroying it. And this is why billionaires carry billions in debt. Robert Kiyosaki, he says he's got billions of dollars in debt. He's not broke. He's just using his debt to leverage and acquire assets that appreciate faster than the interest rate on the debt. Okay, and it's also generating income for him. That's the entire strategy. Borrow cheap, buy assets that grow, okay, and repeat. Because effectively, good debt generates cash flow. Bad debt will absolutely drain your cash flow. Here's what happens. If we're looking at cash flow, when you first acquire the property, okay, generally you're going to be making up for the cash flow. So let's say the interest rate's at 6%, your rental yield, call it, is 4%, for example. Okay, your rental yield is 4% of the property value. Okay, and let's add another 1% on top of that for expenses. So we're looking at 5% of income against the property versus 6% in interest. That's the first year. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, likely the rental yield will be 8% of the property value, like of what you initially bought it for. You take away 1% from that. So then we go 7%. It's got a 7% yield on it now versus a 6% interest rate. Okay, now you're 1% up every year. So it happens. You're gonna acquire the debt. You're gonna be a little bit out of pocket, and then effectively, what's going to happen is the property is going to start covering itself. So it's a win-win. It's appreciating in value, and it's covering itself. So effectively, it becomes positive leverage. Whereas a car loan will generate nothing for you. You've got $60,000 financed at 8%. You're paying at least $5,000 a year in interest, and the car is costing you insurance, rego, and maintenance on top of that. So it's a pure cash flow drain with no income to actually offset it. Same with your home loan. If you live in the home that you own, you might be paying $50,000 a year in interest and it's getting no income back. It's necessary to have a place to live, but it's not an investment. People think their house is an investment. It's a lifestyle expense. Okay, that happens to be financed with debt. And here's the thing. Most people spend way more money on the house that they live in versus investment properties, which means they have way more non-deductible debt than they do deductible debt. I'll tell you what my wealthiest investors do. They structure their finances to maximize income-producing debt and minimize cash flow draining debt. So they'd rather owe $3 million on investment properties generating $300,000 in rent than owe $1.5 million on their home generating nothing. Okay, the total debt is higher, but their cash flow position is effectively stronger and their wealth is growing faster. I'll give you another example. Yesterday, we actually spoke to a client who wanted to acquire $5 million in debt. He's a developer who had built a set of duplexes in Blakehurst. He wanted to take out $5 million of debt to effectively cover the cost of that because he understands that's an asset for him. Once he builds it, he's going to hold them for a little bit and then sell them at the right time. But he understands this is an asset for me and it's going to generate income. Therefore, the $5 million in debt that I'm acquiring to do this is not going to scare me because I know I'm going to get a return out of it. Effectively, their total debt is higher, but their cash flow position is stronger and their wealth is growing faster. Okay, most high income earners focus on total debt rather than the quality of the debt. They think less debt equals better financial position, but that's wrong because better debt structure equals better financial position. You can have more total debt and be wealthier if it's the right kind of debt financing the right kind of assets. Let me show you what good debt actually looks like with real numbers from clients that I've personally worked with. So the first example is one of my high income earners who borrowed $650,000 to buy an investment property worth $800,000. So he put down $150,000 as a deposit. Okay, the property rents for $700 a week, which is $36,400 a year. Now, loan repayments on something like that was about $3,900 a month, which is $46,800 a year. Now, after they rent it, they're negative about $10,400, but the interest is tax deductible and they're in the 45% tax bracket. So they get back roughly $10,500 in tax. Their actual out-of-pocket cost is basically zero. Okay, I understand they have to front it, but then they get the deduction anyway. Meanwhile, the property appreciates in value around 5% a year. So they have $40,000 growing every year and they're not doing anything for it. Over 10 years, that's $400,000 in wealth created using the bank's money. Okay, that's good debt working exactly how it should. Now, another example is one of our business owners. They borrowed $300,000 to buy equipment that allows them to take on larger contracts. That equipment generates an additional $120,000 at least in revenue per year. The loan repayments are $45,000, so the debt is generating $75,000 net profit after covering itself. So that $300,000 loan just bought $75,000 in annual income. Okay, this is the same thing for people who take out loan to acquire profitable businesses. The same thing happens. They're making lots of cash on that business, and it's just a small amount of debt required to take it over, and effectively they end up paying the debt off within a couple of years because the business is generating so much income that they can just keep smashing off that debt, and then they have no debt attached to the business that they've just purchased, and everything they're generating from it is positive cash flow. So it's a win-win in those situations. Now, in both cases, the debt is either producing income, appreciating in value, or both. Okay, you're using other people's money to acquire assets that make you wealthier. The debt is a tool, not a burden. Think of it as these people are investors into my future, rather than it's some sort of burden that I have to pay back. Okay, now let me show you what bad debt looks like in the same income bracket. First example was a high income earner borrowing $90,000 to buy a new luxury car. The interest rate is 7%, so they're paying around $6,300 a year in interest. Now that interest is not tax deductible, and the car loses 25% of its value in the first year. So now it's worth $67,500. They've paid $6,300 in interest to own something that's lost $22,500 in value. So they're effectively down $28,800 in year one. That's bad debt. That's a prime example of bad debt. Second example is carrying $30,000 on a credit card at 19% interest. We see this all the time with our high income earners. They fall into lifestyle trap. They use all the money on the credit card. Okay, they max it out. Only when they when they receive their bonus in the year or whatever they receive in that year, then they have to focus on smashing it down. Or they're just really stuck with a bad credit card that they have to pay every single month. Now that $30,000 credit card is costing them $5,700 a year in interest to just service the debt. They obviously have to pay back the money as well. Now that $30,000 was spent, like I said, on travel, dining, lifestyle expenses, and effectively it's gone. There's no asset to show for it. They're paying $5,700 a year at least for consumption that happened in the past and gave them zero lasting value. Okay, that's bad debt. I'm not saying don't go on holidays. Go on holidays, sure. But how about invest in assets first that are going to pay you a return? Therefore, you can use that return from the asset to fund your holiday. Rather than funding your holiday, being behind, not having any assets to show for it, and then having to try and play catch up to try and get rid of the debt that you've used, and then consider for the next 3 years, oh, maybe we should buy an investment property. Don't do that. That's just not a good idea whatsoever. Now, I'll give you another example. Let's say you're borrowing $1.2 million at least to buy a house that you're going to live in. The interest is $72,000 a year and is not tax deductible. The home might appreciate, it might go up in value, but it's not generating any income. Here's what people need to understand. Yes, the house is appreciating in value, but the only way you're going to get access to that cash is A, if you sell the house. Realistically, you're not going to sell. If you've bought your house that you'd like to live in your dream home, realistically, you're not planning on selling it. So what's the point of having that cash tied up in that property if you can't even use it anyway? The only way that I find a benefit in an owner-occupied home is when people actually leverage the equity in the home that they've obtained in order to buy income-producing assets and good debt. So that's the only time that I really like owner-occupied homes, is when we're actually leveraging it towards building wealth and not just sitting on it thinking, oh yeah, I bought in a good area, my house is going to go up. Think of your grandparents. They bought their houses, they paid off their mortgages. Okay, they bought, like if I look at my grandparents, they bought their house, they completely paid off their mortgage and they just sat in it. But now what's their house doing for them? Nothing. Now they still have to live off the pension because their house is not doing anything for them. What did they achieve in doing that whole exercise? Whereas if they had done something differently with their money, if they had bought income producing assets, if they had bought investments and then thought about their house afterwards, well, maybe they'd have investments paying them now rather than just sitting on a house that's worth more than what they bought it for. Like I said, I'm not saying don't buy a home. I'm saying recognize what it is. It's a lifestyle choice. It's not an investment, and use it properly. If you're choosing to aggressively pay down your home loan whilst you've got opportunities to acquire income producing assets, then you're effectively prioritizing lifestyle over wealth building. That's fine if it's intentional. And if you're in a high income bracket, I wouldn't suggest it because most people don't realize that they're making a really, really massive trade-off. Now, high income earners make a specific mistake with the debt that keeps them from building real wealth. They can afford the repayments on almost anything, so they don't think critically about whether the debt makes sense. A $1,500 a month car payment fits the budget. A $5,000 a month home loan is manageable, even if it, like, depending on your income, I'm seeing up to $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month in home loan repayments. Now, they approve the debt based on whether they can service it, not on whether it's building or destroying wealth. And this is something that I really need you to consider next time you're acquiring debts. Like, is this going to build my wealth or destroy it? And the result is they end up with a high income, strong cash flow, and a balance sheet full of liabilities, financed with non-deductible debt. New cars every few years, a large home loan, maybe a boat or a holiday house they use twice a year. So the clients we see are earning anywhere between $300,000, so 6 figures to 7 figures, millions annually. But they're not building real wealth at the rate they should be because their debt structure is actually working against them. Meanwhile, they're hesitant to take on investment debt because it feels risky or because they've been told to minimize debt. So they pay off their investment loans aggressively. Okay, so I've actually seen this way too many times. People who pay off their investment loans aggressively whilst keeping their car loan and non-deductible home loan because those feel normal to them. It feels like accepted in society to have a home loan debt but not to have investment debt. So you're paying off the debt that's tax deductible and income producing whilst keeping debt that's non-deductible and financing depreciating liabilities. That's just completely backwards, and that's why a lot of people are not building the wealth that they'd like to be building despite their high income. Like I said, the wealthy do the complete opposite. They avoid non-deductible debt on depreciating liabilities entirely. They don't finance cars, they don't carry credit card balances. And I'm not saying car finance is horrible. I wouldn't pay for cars in cash. If I was to buy a new car, I would finance it. But I'm saying don't prioritize car finance over buying an investment property. That's the wrong way to do it. That's the thing. That's why I see the wealth build their wealth faster than what just people earning a higher income is, because they know how to prioritize certain debt and what debt to acquire first. You know, as long as they're building their wealth and they're doing what they have to do, they'll take out the car loan, but they've got their priorities straight. Okay, now here's exactly how to fix this if you're currently structured wrong. Step 1, what I want you to do is list every debt that you have. Separate them into 2 columns. We've got the good debt column and the bad debt column. Good debt, like I said, is tax deductible. It's income producing, or it's financing appreciating assets or a business of some sort that's earning you income. Bad debt is everything else, and be honest about what category your home loan falls into. Step 2, eliminate all bad debt as fast as possible. Credit cards, car loans, personal loans, anything non-deductible that's financing consumption or depreciating assets, try and get rid of them as soon as possible. Use your high income to smash these off. Okay, get them to zero and just don't take them out again. Sometimes even consolidating the debt can feel like a step backwards, but it's actually a step forward, depending on how much equity you have in your home. And if it's a good idea to use the equity towards that, it's very circumstantial, but sometimes it is actually a good idea to consolidate the debt in the home loan so you can pretty much start from scratch without having to wait too long. And step 3 is to minimize your non-deductible home loan. Now, don't obsess over paying it off completely, but this is how I do it. I do it 2 ways. The first way is to pull your excess cash flow into your offset account, okay? And then effectively what we can do is a few things. Once you've got enough cash flow in there, we can debt recycle, which, like I said, watch my video on debt recycling, where we convert a certain chunk of your home loan into good debt, tax deductible debt, and then use that money to buy income producing assets. That's the first way you can do it. Or the second way you can minimize your home loan debt is by effectively purchasing enough investment properties that's going to offset the income. I've spoken about this before, but I can do a dedicated video on it as well. And step 4 would be to maximize your good debt. So use your borrowing capacity and your high income to acquire as many income producing assets as you can responsibly service. Investment properties are the easiest path for most high income earners because lenders understand them and the tax benefits are clear. You actually get a higher borrowing capacity when you buy it as an investment because of the way the bank assesses it. So if you've got $100,000 sitting in your offset on your home, don't use it to pay down the loan. Would use it to debt recycle again. Like I said, go back and watch that video. But that $100,000 will become a deposit on an investment property through debt recycling. So then a part of your home loan has been converted into deductible debt, okay, without actually increasing your total borrowing. So then your interest bill is the same, but now the ATO is giving you back $13,000 a year in tax instead. Step 5 would be never pay off good debt early unless you have no better use for the capital. If your investment loan is at 6% and you can deploy that capital into another asset earning 8 or 10% in total returns, then don't pay off the loan. Okay, use capital to acquire more assets. The wealthy pay minimum payments on good debt and invest the rest. That's why I sometimes suggest, or I mostly suggest, interest only on your investment loans, not principal and interest, especially if you have owner-occupied debt. This is a complete mindset shift for most high-income earners because you've been taught that debt is bad and you should pay it off. Now, that's true for bad debt. It's completely wrong for good debt. Good debt is leverage. It's a tool to acquire more assets faster than you could with cash alone. You couldn't possibly acquire the assets that you'd like to, or you should be, with just your cash if you don't actually acquire debt. And here's what you need to take away from this. Good debt buys assets. It's tax deductible, it finances things that appreciate, and it generates income. The wealthy maximize good debt, and I do myself, because it's the fastest path to building wealth when you're starting from a high income. And bad debt buys liabilities. It's not tax deductible, it finances things that depreciate, and it drains cash flow. The wealthy avoid bad debt completely because it destroys their wealth no matter how high your income is. Like I said, they don't prioritize bad debt, they prioritize good debt. And if your goal is to be debt-free, okay, effectively you're optimizing for the wrong income. Debt-free sounds good, but it usually means asset pool. The real goal is zero bad debt and maximum good debt structured properly. And that's how you turn a high income into generational wealth. This is exactly what my team and I do for high income earners. And it's exactly what I do for myself. We review your entire debt position. We identify what's working against you, and we restructure your loans so you're maximizing deductible debt and minimizing non-deductible debt, and using your borrowing capacity to acquire income producing assets instead of liabilities. Like I said, if you're earning 6 figures, $250,000 plus into 7 figures a year, but you're not building wealth at the rate you should be, then your debt structure is probably the problem. My link is in my bio. We'll go through your loans, your tax position, your borrowing capacity, and show you exactly how to fix it. Think about where you'll be in 10 years if you spend the next decade paying off your home loan and avoiding investment debt. You own your home outright, but you'll have 0 investment properties, 0 passive income, and your only wealth will be equity in a house that you live in and you're not going to sell. You'll be asset rich on paper, barely even actually, but cash poor in reality. However, if you spend the next decade eliminating bad debt and maximizing good debt, you own multiple income producing properties, you'll have cash flow from rent, you'll have equity growing across multiple assets while effectively you don't do anything like to make that equity grow. It grows while you're not doing anything. And you have built actual wealth that generates income whether you're working or not. The difference between those two paths is understanding good debt versus bad debt and structuring your finances accordingly. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to my channel. We upload new videos every single week, and if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments.